A Jewish tax collector sits down to write a gospel. He has seen things no one would believe. He has left a career, crossed a room when a rabbi said, "Follow me," watched a dead girl breathe again, watched bread multiply in his own hands, and now he is writing the most important document of his life, a document designed to convince his own people, Jews steeped in the Torah, who memorized the prophets, who could trace the line of David in their sleep, that Jesus of Nazareth is the Messiah they have been waiting for. And he opens with a genealogy. That is not strange. In the ancient world, genealogies were not filler. They were arguments. They were legal documents. They were the first thing a Jewish reader would scan when evaluating any claim to royal or priestly legitimacy. A genealogy said, "Here is where this person comes from. Here is who they are. Here is whether you can trust what comes next." Matthew knows exactly what he is doing. He is writing for a Jewish audience, and he is leading with proof. So every Jewish reader who picked up this document would have done what Jewish readers always did. They would have scanned the names: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David, Solomon, the familiar rhythm of covenant history, name after name, father to son, the unbroken thread of a promise God had been keeping for 2,000 years. And then they would have stopped. 5 times, because 5 names in that list do not belong. Not because they are wrong, because in a Jewish genealogy in the 1st century, women almost never appeared at all. The line was traced through fathers. That was the convention. That was the form. Matthew was writing in a genre that had rules, and one of the rules was that the names were male, always. And yet, there they are, 5 women, tucked inside a list of 42 generations, as if they belonged there, as if Matthew placed them there deliberately. He did. And once you understand who these 5 women are, once you understand what their stories actually contain, you will never read Matthew chapter 1 the same way again. Because Matthew is not just listing ancestors. He is making a theological argument. He is telling you something about the kind of Savior Jesus would be before Jesus has done a single thing in the narrative. Let us go through them one by one, and let us be honest about what we find. The first woman Matthew names is Tamar, Genesis chapter 38, and if you know the story, you already understand why a 1st century Jewish reader would have raised an eyebrow. Here's the background. Judah, one of the 12 sons of Jacob, has 3 sons. The oldest is Ur marries a Canaanite woman named Tamar. Is wicked in the sight of the Lord, and God puts him to death, Genesis 38:7. We are not told what did, just that it was serious enough for that sentence. Under the ancient custom called levirate marriage, when a man died without children, his brother was obligated to marry the widow and father a child who would carry the dead man's name and inherit his property. It was a system designed to protect widows who had almost no economic security outside of a husband or a son. So Judah tells his 2nd son Onan to fulfill his duty to Tamar. Onan refuses. He takes advantage of Tamar, but deliberately prevents her from conceiving, because any child born would not legally be his, Genesis 38:9. God puts him to death also. 2 sons dead.
Judah is now afraid. He has one son left, a younger boy named Shelah, and he is not about to give him to this woman. So he sends Tamar back to her father's house, telling her to wait until Shelah is grown. It is a promise he never intends to keep. And time passes, and Shelah grows up, and Tamar is still waiting, still childless, still invisible. And then Judah's wife dies, and Judah goes to shear his sheep. And Tamar, who has watched years disappear while Judah withheld from her the justice the law required, takes matters into her own hands. She removes her widow's clothes. She covers herself with a veil. She sits at the entrance of a town on the road Judah will travel. And Judah, who does not recognize her, assumes she is a prostitute, approaches her, and sleeps with her. Before she leaves, Tamar takes his seal, his cord, and his staff as a pledge of payment, his identifying documents. She conceives. 3 months later, someone tells Judah that her daughter-in-law is immoral and pregnant. Judah's response is immediate. Bring her out and let her be burned. Genesis 38:24. He is pronouncing a death sentence on a woman for the exact kind of behavior he himself just engaged in, without a second thought. And then Tamar produces the seal, the cord, and the staff. Genesis 38:25. She says, "The man to whom these belong is the one by whom I am with child." And she adds something worth letting land. She says, "Please determine whose these are." And Judah looks at the evidence he cannot deny, and he says something remarkable. She is more righteous than he is. Genesis 38:26. He does not say she was right to do what she did. He says she is more righteous than he is, because he withheld Shelah. He denied her what the law promised her. He was the one who violated covenant first. Tamar gives birth to twins. One of them is named Perez, and from Perez the line runs directly to David, and from David to Jesus. Here is what Matthew is doing by opening with Tamar. He is introducing a woman who had every social and legal structure working against her, who was denied justice by the man who was supposed to protect her, who did something that looked scandalous from the outside and was declared righteous by the man who had wronged her. God did not wait for a clean story to carry the Messiah's line forward. He worked through the wronged. He worked through the irregular. He worked through the woman the system forgot. That is the first name. The second name is Rahab, and this one is even more surprising. Rahab is not just a woman in an irregular situation. Rahab is a prostitute. That's how she is identified in Joshua chapter 2, and that's how she is identified in the New Testament when she is mentioned in Hebrews 11:31 and James 2:25. The text does not soften it. It does not reach for a euphemism. It says what it says. But here's the other thing about Rahab. She's a Canaanite. She lives in Jericho, the first city that stands between Israel and the Promised Land. The Canaanites are not the chosen people. They're the people the chosen people are about to displace. And yet, when Joshua sends 2 spies into Jericho to scout the city, it is Rahab who hides them. It is Rahab who lies to the king's soldiers when they come asking questions, and it is Rahab who says to the spies something that should have stopped them cold. Joshua chapter 2, verses 9 through 11. I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land are faint-hearted because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were on the other side of the Jordan. For the Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and on earth beneath.
Read that carefully. Rahab is a Canaanite prostitute living inside the walls of a city that is about to be destroyed, and she is making the clearest confession of faith in the entire book of Joshua. She has heard the reports, she has drawn the correct conclusion, she has decided that the God of Israel is the only God that matters, and she risks her life to act on that conclusion. The spies make a covenant with her. When the walls come down, anyone inside her house with a scarlet cord hanging from the window will be spared. The walls fall, the city burns, and Rahab and her family walk out alive. She does not walk back to the margins of the story. She marries into Israel. Matthew 1 verse 5 tells us she is the mother of Boaz, the same Boaz who will appear in the very next story. Here is what Rahab's presence in the genealogy announces. The line of the Messiah does not belong to one ethnicity. It does not belong to perfect moral histories. It belongs to faith. Hebrews 11:31 lists Rahab in the great hall of faith alongside Abraham and Moses and David, not because she was a member of the right family, because she believed, because when the moment came, she acted on what she believed at great personal cost. Matthew is placing a Canaanite prostitute in the family tree of the Jewish Messiah and daring the reader to say that God should have chosen someone more qualified. He is saying the question was never qualification. The question was always faith. And faith does not require a particular background to be genuine. The third name is Ruth, and if Rahab is the most shocking name in the list, Ruth is the most beloved. The book of Ruth is one of the most beautifully written short stories in the entire Bible. It is 4 chapters long, and it reads like something that was meant to be read aloud slowly around a fire to people who needed to be reminded that ordinary faithfulness has extraordinary consequences. Here is the setup. A woman named Naomi leaves Israel with her husband and 2 sons during a famine. They settle in Moab. The sons marry Moabite women. One of them is named Ruth. And then within 10 years, Naomi's husband dies. Both of her sons die, and she is left with 2 daughters-in-law in a foreign country with no income, no social standing, and no future that she can see. She tells them to go home, to go back to their own families, their own people, their own gods. She has nothing to offer them. One of them, Orpah, kisses Naomi and leaves. And then there is Ruth. Ruth 1:16-17. But Ruth said, "Entreat me not to leave you, or to turn back from following after you. For wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts you and me." This is not a casual declaration. This is a covenant. Ruth is a Moabite. The Moabites were not friends of Israel. Deuteronomy 23 verse 3 specifically excluded Moabites from the assembly of the Lord to the 10th generation, and Ruth is choosing to leave everything, her culture, her family, her religion, her future prospects in her own country, to follow an older widow back to a land where she will be a foreigner with no guarantees.
She does it anyway, because of love, because of loyalty, because something she saw in Naomi's God convinced her that he was worth following even into uncertainty. They arrive in Bethlehem. Ruth goes out to glean in the fields, the ancient welfare system that allowed the poor to gather what the harvesters left behind. She ends up in the field of a man named Boaz, who turns out to be a relative of Naomi's deceased husband. Boaz notices Ruth. He hears her story. He is moved by her faithfulness. He instructs his workers to leave extra grain for her deliberately, and over time, through a process of ancient legal covenant that involves a sandal and a public declaration at the city gate, Boaz redeems Ruth. He marries her, he restores Naomi's family line, and Ruth gives birth to a son named Obed. Obed is the father of Jesse. Jesse is the father of David. If this is helping you see a pattern beginning to form, take a second and share this with someone who loves the Bible. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next, because we are not done yet. Ruth is the second Gentile woman in 3 names. She is a Moabite, explicitly excluded by the law, explicitly included by God. And her inclusion is not accidental or incidental. Matthew is hammering a point. The family of the Messiah has always been bigger than anyone expected. The borders of grace have always been drawn wider than the gatekeepers wanted. And Ruth's story adds something Tamar and Rahab do not. It adds hesed, that Hebrew word that the English language does not have a clean translation for. It means steadfast love, covenant love, the kind of love that keeps showing up even when it's not required to, even when it would be easier to leave. Ruth is the embodiment of hesed directed toward another human being, and that love mirrors the love of the God she has chosen to follow. Matthew is not just filling a genealogy, he is building a portrait. Every woman he adds deepens the picture of what kind of kingdom the Messiah will inaugurate. And then we arrive at the 4th name, and this one is the one that should stop you completely. Matthew 1 verse 6, "And David the king begot Solomon by her who had been the wife of Uriah." He does not say Bathsheba, he says her who had been the wife of Uriah. That is not an accident, that is a deliberate choice. In a list that names every other woman directly, Matthew refuses to give Bathsheba her own name and instead anchors her identity to the man she was married to before David took her. You have to understand what Matthew is doing. He is writing a genealogy of the Messiah. He is making the case that Jesus is the fulfillment of the Davidic covenant, the promise God made to David in 2 Samuel 7, that his throne would be established forever. David is the high point of this genealogy. He is the king after God's own heart. He is the man to whom the promise was given, and Matthew will not let you get to David without remembering what David did. The story is in 2 Samuel 11. David is in Jerusalem while his army is at war, which is already the first problem, because kings were supposed to lead their armies into battle. He looks from his roof and sees a woman bathing. He asks about her. She is told she is Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah the Hittite, one of his most loyal soldiers, and David sends for her anyway. He sleeps with her, she conceives, and when David discovers she is pregnant, he orchestrates a cover-up that escalates until he has placed Uriah at the front of the battle and ordered his men to pull back. Uriah is killed. David takes Bathsheba as his wife. The prophet Nathan confronts David. He tells him a parable about a rich man who took a poor man's only lamb. David is furious at the injustice of it, and Nathan says, "You are the man." 2 Samuel 12, verse 7. The child born from this union dies, David grieves, and then Solomon is born from the same woman, and Solomon is the one who builds the temple, and from Solomon's line the genealogy runs all the way to Joseph, the husband of Mary.
Matthew will not let any of that disappear. He names the wife of Uriah instead of Bathsheba because he wants you to feel the weight of what David did every time you read this name. This is the great king. This is the man after God's own heart, and his greatest sin is written into the Messiah's bloodline in permanent ink. Here is what most people miss about this choice. Matthew is not trying to embarrass David. He is making a theological point that is essential to everything the gospel is about. The line of the Messiah is not a line of perfect people. It is a line of forgiven people. It is a line of people who committed serious failures, who faced real consequences, and through whom God kept his promise anyway. Because God's faithfulness is not contingent on human faithfulness. His covenant does not depend on the moral record of the people he made it with. David failed catastrophically, and God did not revoke the promise. He did not start the genealogy over with someone cleaner. He kept going. And by the wife of Uriah, the line continued toward the one who would be called the Son of David, who would be called the Son of God, who would come not to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. Matthew 9:13. The scandal in the genealogy is preparation for the gospel that follows it. And now the fifth woman, the one Matthew does name, and the way he names her is unlike every other name in the list. Matthew chapter 1, verse 16. And Jacob begot Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. Every other entry in the genealogy follows the same grammatical pattern. Abraham begot Isaac, Isaac begot Jacob, David begot Solomon. The subject begets the object, father to son, active voice, straightforward succession. The line moves through the man. But when Matthew reaches Joseph, the pattern breaks. Joseph is identified not as the one who begot Jesus, but as the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus. That phrase, "of whom," in the Greek, is feminine singular. It refers specifically to Mary, not to Joseph. Matthew is being grammatically precise about something that will become theologically essential. Joseph is in the line, but Jesus is born of Mary. The normal chain of human begetting stops here. And then Matthew tells us what that means. Verses 18 through 20. Now the birth of Jesus Christ was as follows. After his mother Mary was betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found with child of the Holy Spirit. Then Joseph, her husband, being a just man and not wanting to make her a public example, was minded to put her away secretly. But while he thought about these things, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take to you Mary your wife, for that which is conceived in her is of the Holy Spirit. Consider what Mary's situation looked like from the outside. She is betrothed, which in the first century was a legal contract more binding than an engagement, but before the couple had begun living together. And she is pregnant, and Joseph knows it is not his child. In Jewish law, a betrothed woman who became pregnant by another man could be charged with adultery. The penalty could be death. Deuteronomy 22:23 through 24. Joseph, who is described as a just man, begins to make plans to dissolve the betrothal quietly rather than expose her to public shame. Mary is an unmarried pregnant teenager in a culture where that is a potential death sentence, and she said yes. Luke chapter 1, verse 38. Behold, the maidservant of the Lord, let it be to me according to your word. She said yes before the angel appeared to Joseph in a dream. She said yes before the logistics were worked out. She said yes into the most socially dangerous and personally costly situation a young Jewish woman could find herself in. And Matthew places her at the end of a list that began with Tamar, who was declared righteous after being denied justice, with Rahab, who was saved by faith she had no reason to have, with Ruth, who chose covenant love over personal safety, with the wife of Uriah, whose presence forces the reader to sit with the weight of the greatest failure in David's story. And the list ends with a teenager who said yes to God when yes could have gotten her killed. Now, step back, look at all five together, because Matthew is too careful a writer for this to be anything other than intentional. And when you look at them together, the pattern is not subtle. It is a declaration. Every one of these women was in an irregular situation. Every one of them occupied a place on the social margins. Tamar was a wronged widow, operating outside the system because the system had failed her. Rahab was a Canaanite prostitute in a city marked for destruction. Ruth was a Moabite foreigner, explicitly excluded from Deuteronomy. Bathsheba was a woman whose name Matthew refuses to use because her story is bound up with the worst thing the greatest king ever did. And Mary was an unmarried pregnant girl in a culture where they had no mercy for that. Not one of them fits the profile of what you would expect in a royal genealogy. Not one of them arrived in the story with a clean record, the right bloodline, and the right circumstances. Every single one of them was exactly the kind of person the gatekeepers of respectability would have passed over, and Matthew opens his gospel with all five of them. He's not being careless. He's not being provocative for the sake of it. He is introducing the reader to the logic of the kingdom before Jesus has said a single word. He is saying, look at the pattern. Look at who God keeps choosing. Look at the kind of story God keeps working through. Because when Jesus arrives, he is going to stop at the well where no respectable rabbi stopped and speak to a Samaritan woman. He is going to let a sinful woman wash his feet with her tears in the house of a Pharisee who is appalled by the whole scene. He is going to heal the daughter of a Canaanite woman who refused to take no for an answer. He is going to say to a woman caught in the act of adultery, "Neither do I condemn you."
The genealogy is a preview. The five women in Matthew 1 are the overture. They are telling you exactly what kind of Messiah is coming before the Messiah arrives. There are three things worth carrying out of this video. The first is this: God's sovereignty is not threatened by human failure. Look at what is inside the genealogy of Jesus. Tamar's desperation, Rahab's profession, Ruth's foreignness, David's violence, Mary's vulnerability. God did not wait for the circumstances to be clean before he moved. He did not hold the promise hostage to the moral record of the people in the line. He wrote his faithfulness through every kind of human brokenness imaginable. Which means your story, with all its irregular chapters and its moments you would rather not explain, is not disqualifying evidence. It may be exactly the kind of material God has always worked with best. The second thing is this: the borders of grace have always been wider than the gatekeepers thought. Two of the five women are Gentiles. Ruth is explicitly excluded by Deuteronomy. Rahab is from one of the nations Israel displaced. Matthew is writing to a Jewish audience. He is making the case for a Jewish Messiah, and he plants two Gentile women in the bloodline before the story even begins. He is telling his readers before chapter 1 is finished, this Messiah belongs to more than you expected. The promise made to Abraham in Genesis 12:3, that all the families of the earth shall be blessed through him, was not poetic language. It was a design specification, and the genealogy is its first proof. The third thing is the one that stays with me most. Look at what these women have in common beyond the irregularity. Every single one of them acted in faith when acting in faith cost them something real. Tamar risked her life to expose injustice and claim what was rightfully hers. Rahab hid the spies when she had no guarantee the God of Israel would protect her. Ruth walked away from everything familiar to follow an older widow into an uncertain future. Bathsheba had no choice in what was done to her, but her name is written there as a permanent witness that God sees what was taken from the powerless and still holds the promise. Mary said yes, when yes meant an unmarked road through social death. None of them are passive recipients of grace. They are active participants in a story they could not fully see. They could not read Matthew 1. They could not know their names would be in the genealogy of the Messiah. They were just women in impossible situations, making costly choices in the direction of God. And it turned out, their names were being written somewhere they never imagined. Matthew 1 is not just a list of names to get through on your way to the birth narrative. It is one of the most carefully constructed arguments in the New Testament. 42 generations, 5 women, and a genealogy that proves before the first miracle, before the first parable, before a single word of the Sermon on the Mount, that this Jesus does not come from a line of the impressive and the qualified. He comes from a line of the faithful and the forgiven, the irregular and the unexpected, the wronged and the courageous, and the foreign and the broken and the willing. He comes from exactly the kind of people he came to save. And the door that genealogy opens goes both ways. Every name in that list is a person whose story looked disqualifying from the outside and essential from the inside, which means the question you might be carrying about whether your story is too complicated, too irregular, too far from what you imagined a useful life looks like, that question already has an answer. Matthew already gave it to you. He gave it to you in 5 names placed in a genealogy by a tax collector who knew exactly what he was doing. The Messiah's family tree has always been room for people like you. If this opened the scriptures in a new way for you, the biggest thing you can do is subscribe, leave a comment, it can be just one word, and share this with someone who needs to see the Bible this way. That is genuinely how people find this content. We depend on you to spread it. Please keep us in your prayers. God bless you.